Welcome back to another episode of Untethering Shame, where we explore the complex emotions and stories that shape our lives. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects so many, yet is rarely discussed in depth: how chronic illness can consume your identity and the difficult path of finding yourself amidst it. Our guest today is someone who knows this journey intimately. Jenna Zeihen is a social media marketer, entrepreneur, and the founder and director of Soul Space, a workshop-based initiative that brings people together through the power of human connection. Jenna is also a former Miss America participant and a vibrant creative soul with a passion for journaling. She has filled over 25 volumes thus far with her thoughts and experiences. But behind all these accomplishments, Jenna is also navigating life with mast cell activation syndrome, a condition that has dramatically shaped her day-to-day existence. In this episode, Jenna and I are going to discuss the fine line between living with an illness and becoming defined by it. We'll explore the trauma bonds that can form with others who share the same diagnosis and the unique loneliness that can arise when you find yourself not quite fitting in with either the, quote, healthy world or the community of those still battling illness. It's a conversation about identity, resilience, and the emotional complexities of chronic illness. So get ready to join us as we untangle these experiences and find the space between surviving and truly living. Jenna, I'm so excited for this.
I'm so excited too. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I feel like when we first met to even start talking about this podcast, we could have just hit record right then because there was this instant safety and our brains were just kind of going back and forth like, oh, yes, this. We need to be talking about all of these things. And so I know there's sort of a vibrating energy that we both have. And I like to always anchor the episodes on just kind of naming our emotional state coming into this, where we're at in our lives right now. And so I'm curious if you could describe how you're feeling right now with one word, what would it be?
I think it would be reflective. I'm like sitting here and like the build up to coming on your podcast, just like reflecting on my journey and thinking about what myself like 5 years ago would be thinking about me talking about all of this now.
Yeah.
It's really nostalgic and it's really special. And even though this might not be exactly how I pictured my life being one day, I'm just really grateful to be able to reflect on this journey now with you. And yeah, it's great.
Oh, that's so interesting. And I often in podcasts will ask people to think about their future self listening to this. So it'll be interesting for you to not only be thinking about the you from 5 years ago to now, but the year, 2026, 2027, if you're re-listening to this, sort of the gift we can give ourselves in the future. And so I think
I love that.
Thinking about not only are we talking to other people here and kind of sharing and having this beautiful conversation, but also this idea of talking to yourself in the future, because it's great to be in the state now where you feel this sense of maybe calm within this part of your identity or this part of your journey, but we know that that's not a forever state and there's going to be ups and downs. And so I'm curious because not many people, I did sort of a survey of just random people I interact with. So not official by any means, and maybe 15. So not a very high sample size. But most people I talked to had never heard of mast cell activation syndrome. And I honestly only think that I have, just in the sense that I have worked with eating disorders and I've often seen a really high overlap with other mental health diagnoses and different chronic health diagnoses. And so if I hadn't been in that state, I honestly don't know that I would have heard of it either. So not asking you to be a doctor or give us some sort of formal definition, but can you explain what it is, just sort of in general terms for people listening?
Absolutely. I was just trying to explain this to a friend of mine because I feel like even the people that are closest to me, they know what it is, but they don't really understand what's happening within the body. So I guess a little imagery for you to break it down. I think of the mast cells like bath bombs. So like, when you see like the bath bombs that are super fancy, they got the glitter, different colors. Sometimes there's something in the middle. So let's say that we have a bunch of those bath bombs. And then when they touch water, they open up and all of the different colors start to separate and the pieces kind of go everywhere. So that's what happens to a mast cell when it is triggered by something. So let's say a regular person with no real allergies gets stung by a bee. their mast cells are still going to open up and degranulate and release all of these different sorts of chemicals like histamine, which you probably heard of and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people have heard of from antihistamines like Zyrtec or different allergy medications. So basically this histamine chemical and prostaglandins and all these other things are coming out of the cells, and it's causing an allergic response to the body. The kicker with mast cell disease, though, is that you do not have to have a true blood allergy for that reaction to take place. And
Mm.
within the mast cell disease realm, I think of it as like two different pieces. One is mastocytosis. So that would be like if you had way too many bath bombs, just way too
Mm.
many, and they just kept multiplying. And
Yeah.
then mast cell activation syndrome is you have a normal amount of bath bombs, but they're opening up without water, just whenever.
Mm. I mean, so on the one hand, not to make light of it, my daughter, who's 4.5, she would love this imagery, and I think she would understand what mast cell activation syndrome is now because she's obsessed with bath bombs and why some of them foam, why some of them foam bigger than others, how to do,
Yes.
how to stop it from foaming by taking it out of the water, all that. But I think it's such a cool way to break it down because people have seen all of those aspects before. Again, whether they've used a bath bomb or not, we can imagine what happens. And so essentially what you're saying is you have a quote unquote normal, which I don't really know what the range is, but a normal amount of mast cells in your body. Your mast cells are working. The problem is that they're going to work without being called in. And so they're working
Yes.
too much and it's putting your body in this reaction state that it doesn't need to be in. So my assumption is it's almost like your body is sort of vigilant to any threat, but there doesn't even need to be a threat. And it's just kind of going into this state. And
Yes.
can you predict it or does it just sort of happen on its own?
So it's sort of like you just said, it's like an overdrive. Sometimes like I've had doctors say it's like you have a great superhero, but like they're fighting against the wrong cause here. And we see that imagery used to with a lot
Ah.
of autoimmune diseases and other things like that. Something I should have stated also is that we have mast cells in every tissue and part of our body. Everybody does. So that means that when they're degranulating with all these inflammatory different chemicals, it's affecting every system of the body potentially. Everybody's different.
Mm, right.
And that's the other thing is that it affects everybody so very differently. And for me, it started with a lot of GI responses, and that would kind of be a red flag for me. So stomach problems, digestive problems, our skin is our greatest, biggest organ here, and mine
Hmm.
reacts really badly with my mast cells. Now, something funny, not so funny, but kind of funny, is that I had been reacting probably, I mean, potentially, my doctors don't know, potentially since I was born, but it became visible when I was in elementary school, and my family just thought I had rosacea or was easily sunburning.
Mm.
Or when I was in my teens, it was acne. It's redness and acne, but it was never those things. So my skin has been a telltale sign for me, and I can normally I call it my spidey senses. I
Mhm.
can spidey sense it out super super easily now. Especially even if I haven't started reacting yet, if I smell something, my sense of smell is so keen. And I genuinely think it has just developed to be stronger because of the condition. It's really
Mhm.
interesting how that all happens.
One of the things I'm thinking about, okay, so you mentioned your digestion. You
Yes.
also mentioned your skin. My guess is when you were little, like now you're looking back and you're kind of piecing things together and going, this could have been happening for a while. But I'm assuming when you were in elementary school, you hadn't heard the term mast cell activation syndrome. You didn't know what that was.
No.
And so what happened? Like, how did it get to a point where you were having these things that were being written off as like, oh, this is normal hormone things like acne, or maybe you have sensitive skin, or maybe you've got some anxiety that's causing GI upset. Take me from there to getting this diagnosis. What did that look like?
I was completely clueless to the world of mast cell disease until 2019. And if we rewind back, I had my first allergic reaction as an infant, and it was to ibuprofen, like in the hospital as a 1-year-old child. And then I couldn't tolerate certain baby formulas. My
Mm.
mom started to take note of this, like, what's going on? Why is my kid like so sensitive? Very strangely enough, my sister was in the hospital on and off from the ages of like 3 to 10. Just we joke that like the universe changed its mind and chose me instead because she was allergic to so many things and then grew out of it. And then around the time that
Mm,
she started to get better, I started reacting to things more. My doctor, my pediatrician thought, Jenna's just different. They used to have a little dosing chart in the office, and it would be like children from the age of this to this, infants from the age of this to this, Jenna Zeihen. I was dosed
mm,
differently than everybody. I reacted to every antibiotic. My mom always said to my doctor, like, there's something wrong with her. And I'm scared if we don't know what it is now, it's
yeah.
just going to continue to develop into adulthood, which it did. My mom is so smart, bless her heart. And I had a lot of environmental allergies. So, like those skin prick tests a lot of people get done.
Yeah.
I reacted like, lit up like a switchboard with those. And that's when I was recommended to go to an ENT. So I went to an ear, nose, throat doctor, and they took a look inside my sinuses and they were like, this is so bad. It looks like she's had a sinus infection for like multiple years without it going away. I had on and off sinus infections and ear infections forever as a kid. Like I was always sick with something and it was always like very mucousy, very allergic. But I always thought of anaphylaxis as peanut butter, throat closing, like the things you think
Mm-hmm.
of with that. So it never seemed like an allergic reaction to me.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time I was 16, I got a nasal sinuplasty, and that was supposed to get out all that stuff out of my sinuses, hopefully help me not have sinus infections moving forward, was supposed to relieve a lot of the problems. That surgery ended up going wrong. And somewhere in there, they cauterized too much of my nose cartilage.
Oh.
So they ended up having like a rare blood problem where my blood was like leaking back into my face post
Hmm.
surgery. Had to
Okay.
go back in again. That was supposed to be a real quick, like 30-minute thing. And I was under for like almost 5 hours.
Oh shit.
And it was just a very strange situation. And my mom afterwards was like, her nose looks weird. Like she doesn't look the same. Like what happened in that operation room? And the doctor was very suspicious. Since then, I've gotten like a cease and desist. So for legal reasons, um, he totally botched my face. I had to get a piece of my ear put in my nose then. So then that's three
Oh
surgeries. And after the second surgery, I got mono like the month after. It was like
jeez.
everything was a perfect storm. So then I'm on all
Yeah.
these steroids, had an allergic reaction to the steroids. I was just so swollen, so inflamed, so red. And then it was then that every time I started eating after that, it was like immense pain, skin flare
Mm,
ups. I looked so different in the face, and everyone just amounted it to, oh, she's developing, she's growing up, she's filling out,
right.
whatever. But I was so swollen. Like, if you look at pictures of me from that time, I had to get a new license because people didn't think it was me.
Well, and I'm assuming because you were also at a time where our sense of identity is changing too. So I'm assuming if every time you eat, it hurts, you don't want to eat, you're like physically uncomfortable. So there's probably also some assumptions that this is like body image. Look at her body's changing. She doesn't like it. So she's not eating. These ways that people are aware that something is changing and then trying to draw conclusions to then be supportive or respond, but they were the wrong conclusions. I'm assuming, anyways, that that's part of the piece. So it's like Jenna's different. Jenna's got all these things. Jenna's body reacts overwhelmingly. Now this is happening. And I could also see that if your mom and you are in this state of overwhelm and it's like I would almost prefer if this was an eating disorder than something else that we don't have the answer to, because this, like, it's another journey and now I can't figure it out and now this thing is happening. And so okay, so now this part's happening. You're going through all this, you're not wanting to eat, your body's changing, people are like, what is going on? Okay, play, keep going.
This is where, and it's so interesting that you bring up your experience like working with different disorders and
Yeah.
knowing of mast cell from eating disorder situations. I have so much shame, which perfect to talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah,
on this
right.
podcast.
Great place. Yeah.
I have so much shame because at that time I was a junior and senior in high school. That was about the time it was. And I
Okay.
had a very close friend, one of my very best friends, also had some strange kind of illness things going on. She actually was the first person I ever knew with POTS. I have
Mm,
POTS now, I know, but I didn't know anything about it at the time. And we were both struggling with this restrictive eating. Mine was very much rooted in I don't look like I I'm not myself. Something's
Yeah.
wrong. Every time I eat, I feel sick. So I did start to get into this cycle of disordered eating. And it made every doctor say, she's starving herself. She's a teen girl. Look
Yeah.
at her. Like, she
Yep.
fits the mold. And I understand, and I have more empathy towards those physicians now looking back, because I understand how that looks. And they have to do what they have to do to treat the patients that come in through their door. And I probably would have sent me to psych too if
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing me at that time. But the amount of times doctors have made me feel like, you have this disease, but you kind of gave it to yourself, because there's a lot of
Mm.
theory around, if you have a mast cell disease or any kind of allergic disease and you stop eating foods you could have had, the opportunity to gain those safe foods back is so low. And then I ended up
Hmm.
developing a thyroid condition in 2020. Also, some research to show that that can also be impacted by eating disorders. So it was a whole mess.
Wait, and I want to reaffirm what you just said. So basically you're meeting with providers. Yes, I agree, empathy, people are making the best decisions they can with the information in front of them, but also they're the medical doctors. You were responding to your symptoms and your pain and just trying to not feel like shit every day. So you stop eating. Sure, of course it's going to develop some restrictive patterns. That's what would happen to anybody you're
Mhm.
afraid of food. You are afraid of your body changing even more. You see this direct correlation with food and this change in your body. You're going to be like, I don't want this. I don't want to keep looking that way.
Yeah.
How could anybody think anything different? And then you end up getting this diagnosis. And then the response is essentially you fucked up because you didn't know better for a diagnosis that you had not yet been given. I just want to confirm that's what that experience was for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess
Okay.
so. And the
Yeah.
joke here is that to this day, there are still doctors in my little bubble
Hmm.
that either A, don't believe I have mast cell. They don't think so. They think I'm wrong. They think the other doctors are wrong.
Yeah.
Or B, like, think this is all just still a big eating disorder charade. I'm
Yeah.
constantly being accused of that, especially when I was so sick that it was just formula dependency. They were
Hmm.
like, her mom's trying to make her get a feeding tube. My mom wasn't allowed in my allergist appointments. They're like, she's an adult. Your mom doesn't need to be in here. It was a mess. And I was just like,
Wow.
I was just at that point trying my best to like not ruffle any feathers, and just, I would be like, I don't care what you call the condition. I'm looking for quality of life
Yeah. I'd like
and
to
controlling
not
the
be here
symptoms.
and be in pain. And if the choice was a feeding tube and feeling like this, like versus being able to eat anything and feel better, I would pick the second option. Like, this isn't me chasing this. But do you think some of that comes from, because again, I've seen this and worked with a lot of providers. I think when we can't fully explain something, why it happens, maybe we know what's going on, but we can't really explain, like, why is this going on? And why suddenly do we have all these, Ehlers-Danlos, POTS, mast cell activation syndrome? There's all these things. And it kind of feels like it's like the autism craze from like 20, 30 years ago, where suddenly everybody's got autism or everybody's got ADHD. Suddenly we're seeing this. And I think there's this, it's made up. And I think sometimes it's like, well, it's in your head. If you could just get your head right and you dealt with your anxiety, you dealt with this, you wouldn't have these. Now, as a therapist, I do strongly believe that there is a correlation between the brain and body. We can make things worse, we can make things better. There's a high, I guess, connection to that. And like our brain has a lot of power. But I think what you're experiencing is not someone saying it's a both and. This is here, and there's things that we can do, and there's ways you're going to make it worse if you don't learn these things. And probably some of your anxiety around food, probably some of your anxiety around feeling this way is going to elevate some of these experiences. Let's work on that. Instead, what they're basically saying is, I think you're either making this up or that shouldn't be this problematic, which I think inadvertently puts it back on you of like, is this an attention grab? Is this something else? Like, are you making this up for something? So I could assume now it's not just shame of like, my life looks different. I can't do these things, but also what's everybody else going to think of me? Because the medical community doesn't take me seriously. So how is the rest of the
Yes.
world going to view me too?
Those years without a diagnosis were so challenging, and even more so for my family, because it was leave of absence from work for my
Mhm.
mom, like trying to run out for appointments. And her bosses would be like, well, what is wrong with Jenna? And she'd be like, they still don't know. And, after hearing that for a couple years, it's like,
Yeah. The
it's
patience wears out.
psychogenic. It's
Yeah.
in her head. Is she still really doing this? And I still get it to this day. People will go, the first thing people will say sometimes coming up to me is, you still just eating the rice and chicken? Have you found any other foods yet? Oh, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want to try something new? And the other really scary thing is two things. One, I got denied from the Mayo Clinic the first time because I had not lost enough weight from the start of my severe downfall with my safe foods. So, despite only being able to consume formula and Cheerios at that time, I hadn't lost enough weight. It blows my mind. I can't.
Yeah. I mean, people that can't see us right now, like my eyes just widened, like, fuck, because that's the problem when
Yeah.
people will come in and I see it on the other side. Like, I'll have a client be like, well, my eating disorder is not that bad. Or like, it's probably not an eating disorder because I don't weigh that low. Or like, I haven't lost that much
Yeah.
weight. And I'm like, that's not the best. It's like still using BMI to determine if someone's healthy or not. And so, okay, so you were denied care because you weren't sick enough, which we're definitely going to get into that in a variety of different ways. What was the second thing you were going to say with that too?
What was the second thing I was going to say? It was that, and then denied to Mayo. Shit. No, this was good.
It's going to come. It's going to be there.
It's going to come right back to me. It was something about, okay, dog whistle words. I'm going to have to tell you again how I got to the mast cell diagnosis. I haven't gotten there yet.
Yes.
But when I was trying to seek help still, I was taught by my friend who had the condition, which thank goodness, because I never would have gotten into the Mayo Clinic, I don't think at all. And if you're listening and you're trying to seek care at a specialty hospital, listen up, like ring your ears in for this. I could not say the words mast cell activation syndrome. I could not say the word POTS. I could not tell them what I thought I had. The second it sounded like I was telling them what I thought was wrong with me, donezo. Additionally, I was not in therapy at the time because I didn't want the risk of that being on my records. I did everything I could to get my past anxiety diagnosis off of my medical records. I always said I was fine. I said, I would hope that people with this sort of problem would have some sense of anxiety because you have to stay alive. But I would just always play it fine. I would always say I'm not depressed. The amount of times I had doctors press me to tell them I was mentally ill, I lied, constantly lied, because I had to get in the door with that doctor. And everyone I knew that had gotten through it, they were like, Jenna, you will get sent to psych. They will not help you. You have to play the game. And it sucks. And it's hard to tell other people that as advice, but it saved me months of time. I went from being waitlisted for like a year to come in this week, like with the difference in the two different times I tried going to
And
the
you
Mayo
think
Clinic.
that's all sort of bias around if we hear these things, it's kind of like I'm thinking about like old teen magazines, like where it's like the yes or no, like, do you do this? Yes or no, like you follow
Yeah.
those things. And so my guess is it's like, well, if any of these words are said, this is the route that we send you to, and we take it in a different lens. So you
And
couldn't do any of those.
like you said, with the how it seems like a craze, and all of a sudden people are wanting to get diagnosed, and they have a flood of girls,
Right.
oftentimes in their 20s, in their teens, in their 30s. Everyone's like, why are all these young women sick? And I have a new theory on it, and I think it has a lot to do with our hormones. And I actually did a deep dive, came across a study done in 2012 that was done on rats, that they compared rats with their ovaries removed, and they had prior had inflammatory responses, asthma, or high IgE levels of allergic antibodies. And once the ovaries were removed, those numbers decreased. It also showed that real adult people with uteruses had lower levels of inflammation versus when they were on their period or going through their menstrual cycle. I think a lot of it has to do with hormones. I think a lot of it is affected in a bigger way from hormones. And I think there's not a lot of research done for things that affect women's reproductive systems.
I mean, I think there's there's a lot of things that aren't done for women's reproductive systems
I'm
and
like,
rights. And so it makes sense that that is the case. I mean, so it's an interesting idea of, because yeah, there's very much, which is why I think the overlap in the assumption for things like eating disorders and anxiety disorders is really high, because
yes.
it is still, even though we know that anxiety disorders, depression, personality disorders, eating disorders affect people of all different intersecting identities, there is still implicit bias and systems of oppression that make it so that people aren't seen with the same. It's the same thing. Like if there is a, let's say, a Black man that is struggling with an eating disorder, they are likely going to get filtered out in the same way you couldn't say certain things. They can't say
Yep.
certain things, or they're not going to get treated with the same respect. So we just see that there's a bias in healthcare, whether it's gender, race, all these different components. And in your case, you had this experience where it's a young white girl. And this is what's happening. It's got to be that she's anxious. It's got to be that she's not eating, when
Yes.
in reality, this thing was going on. And you, at this point of the story, still don't have the diagnosis. You just are starting to think you might know what it is, but you're trying to get to a place where somebody will take you seriously and tell you, yes, it is, or no, it's not. And here's what else I think could be going on.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And I've said time and time again, and with the bias in the whole medical realm, that I am very privileged to be a white woman in this position, because there are plenty of women of color that I've seen
Yeah.
online in our communities that have gotten no help, have
Right.
never been accepted, have never been able to get treatment. And it's like, it's truly horrible, the intersection of that all. But to get back to the diagnosis part, everything is like in chaos. I don't know what's going on with my body. My mom demands a food allergy test, and I was 16, 17 at the time. And it came back positive for gluten, soy, and peanuts, all severe. And at this time, I had been having peanut butter on an apple every day. Like that was a very regular snack for me. So I'm like, I'm not allergic to peanuts. And then I started deep diving, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of people with unconventional peanut allergies. I wonder what other allergies I have that are unconventional,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm not responding with the what you'd see as textbook anaphylaxis or allergic response. I cut all those things out right away. I felt what I could only describe as clean. Like in like a day, I felt like my whole insides were clean. I felt so much better. That high kind of kept going for like 6 to 8 more months. Started feeling sick again. Symptoms got worse again. Then I'm like, okay, maybe I should cut out dairy. Maybe I just need to not have dairy. And so then I'm in this weird restriction pattern again. But I'm journaling and noting, today I ate this. I noticed my skin was more red. I noticed swelling along the jawline. It is 3 days until my period starts. Like I started documenting everything because I figured this might not help me.
Right.
It might make me more crazy.
Yeah.
Or this could be gold if
Right.
I one day find a doctor that can help me. So I continued to document. And then it was around the winter of 2018 where I went to the hospital because I was in so much pain, and they scanned me with an x-ray, and they saw that I had stool backed up to my neck.
Shit.
And they were like, it's going to, this is so gross. I'm so sorry. It's literally going to come out your mouth if we don't do something about this. Your body is not like digesting properly, and it's not releasing properly at all.
Well, and had you been going to the bathroom? Like, were you not pooping and then suddenly that's
I
happening?
was
Were
so
you
constipated.
so okay? So on some level, like you knew something wasn't going on, but obviously you had no idea. And my reaction when you said it was, "Oh shit," which I realize now is like a little like but that's not exactly how I meant it to come off. But so okay, so that's happening, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, that's scary." Okay, keep going.
So I'd always had these GI problems, and the GI problems were always like a big red flag for me. If something like if my stomach hurt or if I wasn't able to go to the bathroom, that was a big red flag for me. So after that happened, I was down bad. I got a colonoscopy, got a endoscopy, whatever, got all those scopes done. They were like, you look really inflamed, you have ulcers, but we don't know why.
Oh geez.
And then I was so sick and I looked so gray and unwell. And I was like, I'm going to run for a pageant. I'm going to do a pageant. Why not? And so during all of this, I decided to run for Miss Kenosha. I ended up in my life timeline, I did it twice. So I lost the first time to my current business partner, Lily Carnes, which is hilarious. It was her first runner up and she won that year. But thank goodness, because I lost and went on to do another competition. And in the basement of that competition, I ate my food alone. A girl came up to me. She was like, "Why are you eating such weird things by yourself?" And I was like, "I can't eat the rest of the things. I don't know. There's something wrong with me. There's not a name for it yet, but whatever. You don't want to hear about it." I was like, not having a good day.
Yeah.
And she was like, "I think you're like me. And I never say this to anybody." And she lifted up her dress and showed me her feeding tube. So she had a GI tube on her stomach. And I was like, "I'm not like you. I do not have a tube. Like, what?" And she was like, "I used to eat the same way that I see you doing. Like, I just watched you from across the room. Let's get like coffee or whatever you can tolerate next week. And just let me tell you my story." So I'm like, okay, I've got nothing to lose. I go home and tell my mom, like, I met this girl and she thinks maybe I'm like her. And I don't know what to think. So we meet up. She tells me her whole story about how she has this weird disease called mast cell activation syndrome. I would have never known about it had she not shared her story with me. Literally, like the most life altering. I'm getting emotional thinking about it. She ended up helping me find a new primary care doctor who is still my doctor. He's amazing, literally saved my life. We share multiple specialists across the Midwest, and we had emergency rooms that we would both go to know us as Jenna and Emma. And it was like the craziest thing ever. Like, people would literally be like, they're two peas in a pod. Like, she's the more progressed version of her. But then it became this idea of, oh my God, am I only going to get worse? And whatever I watch my friend go through, is that my future? That fear never was really present with me until later on in the process. I was just so excited that maybe there was an answer.
Yeah.
And she kind of was the one who guided me and was like, "Don't say these words. These are the meds that work. These are the support groups that have good people. These are the ones where people are going to be mean to you." She saved me years of trial and error for sure. And maybe I would have never gotten anywhere.
Yeah.
She helped me find a formula that was safe for me. Just endless help from this friend. And that is how I figured out I had mast cell disease, from someone else sharing their story with me. Like I said before, some people still don't believe I have it. I have some stingy doctors that one of them thinks that I have something that isn't named yet. He's like, "I don't know if it will come about in your lifetime, but because I have so many true blood allergies and these strange mast cell reactions, they don't have anybody else like that." I only know a couple people with mast cell disease that have true blood allergies, the IgE allergies, and there's just they only have like one or two.
Yeah.
They don't have like 100, and I have like 100.
Yeah.
Like if you test my blood, it's like every fruit, every vegetable, every whatever. So yeah, that's how I found it, is all because my friend told me her story.
Well, and it's interesting because you're describing all these things and this sort of medical trauma that you went through, and this pain and this identity sort of delay, because you're more just trying to get through the day and you're in survival mode rather than figuring out, who am I as a teen, as a young adult? And then you finally find it. And I think whenever something's wrong with us, we want to figure out the answer, because the goal ultimately is that it's curable. We can fix it and then it's going to be fine. Yeah. And so then you have this experience of, we can't fix it. We can help you. But this isn't something, it's not, this bacterial infection that we're going to give you some medicine and you're going to be fine in 2 weeks. This is, we found it, or at least we found something that fits for now. Because I think there's always a bit of a benefit to, I don't know your provider, but I think sometimes going, when I had my eating disorder at the time, the DSM had an eating disorder not otherwise specified. And bulimia and anorexia were two very different diagnoses. The specifics around it looked different than they do now. When the DSM got updated, it changed. And then they basically had different types of anorexia, different types of bulimia. So you could see the diagnoses changing. Even things like hysteria being a diagnosis, decades ago, and women being quote unquote hysterical versus now they're not. And so I think the idea that diagnoses are controlled by humans. Like we are doing the best we can to figure things out. So there's always a chance that this is like a good enough diagnosis and there's something else that's going to better explain it down the road, and that you are sort of the tipping point to something more. And right now it's at least something that the treatment or the response is working enough. And so, okay, now take us through this point of, like you said, you weren't aware of it right away because there's just this bit of like rejoicing and like relief that, oh my gosh, I think I know what's going on. And I've finally not fighting with my providers. But now you've got this label. Now you've got this specific thing. You're bonding with this girl. You're getting connected with other people. I mean, your life wasn't necessarily like everything was quote unquote normal. And then there was a day that everything went to shit. And then I got this diagnosis. You were always sort of living this dual, how do I feel, what's going on, what's happening life. And so my guess is it was always sort of a conversation point in relationships. But now talk to me about that, because I could imagine as you're like getting to know this community of people and you're trying to connect there. Again, I'm comparing it to just my experiences with eating disorders, both my personal and then my professional experience. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of weird, like there's like bonding, but there's also this weird vibe. And then you don't quite connect with anybody else on the outside world because they don't quite understand it in the same way. And so talk to me a little bit about that period.
Yeah. It's a strange world out there for sure.
I mean, period, but like this one especially, yes.
Yeah, I sometimes call it like the sick chick community.
Yeah.
Not to like exclude other people, but if I use that as like a short term,
yeah,
I do sometimes call it the sick chick community. At first I was like, oh my gosh, there's like this world of other people that know what it's like. And at this point I was sort of piecing together, like I went through high school sick and I didn't know I was sick. What could I have been gentler with myself about? I was so hard on myself, but I didn't know I was suffering from what I now know is like extreme brain fog, like super high levels of inflammation, like chronic fatigue from all of this and all the things. And so I'm trying to piece this all together, and all these people are sharing their stories and I'm soaking it up like a sponge. And then you kind of start to realize it's the pain Olympics for some people, which I feel like is kind of what you've experienced as well with eating disorder treatment. And that's kind of how it felt when I was restricting in high school too. I had friends that'd be like, oh my God, I haven't eaten in like a day, or all I had today was iced coffee. And it was giving that energy, but like worse. And then it was, are your reactions documented? That became a big thing. If you want quality care, your reactions needed to be documented. So then every time I had a bad reaction, I would go to the hospital so that it would be documented. And that became a big thing of like, well, how many times are you going to the hospital? How many times have you gone into anaphylaxis? When's the last time you used an EpiPen? And it almost felt like you weren't credible as an allergic person if this wasn't your experience. So it's like, no matter how hard you try to not have the triggers disrupt your life, you almost need them to be treated. Yeah. That was bizarre. My friendship with my friend who helped me get diagnosed was not like that at that time at all. She was my safe place. She was often sicker than me, and I would always be like, you can complain. Like, you can tell me you're sicker than me. Like, it's okay.
Yeah, we're not competing.
We had this understanding, but it was almost the getting better that robbed me. Not getting better in the sense that I'm cured, but the healing that my mind as well as my body began to go through after the Mayo Clinic is what really altered my life, because I had my GI specialist that was like the head of my care look at me and say, so there's really only one thing I can do for patients like you, and it's tell you to go home and prove me wrong, which means I want you to go home and try exercising. I don't care how many times you faint. I want you to go home and try a new safe food. I don't care how many times you react. I want you to get up every day in the morning. I don't care how hard it is to open your eyes. And I want you to come back here in 2 months and prove to me that you're still just as sick as before and that it did nothing for you. Or it could change your life. And I was so mad that he said that. I was like, are you kidding me? You think yoga is going to cure this? I was like, all right, okay, I'll go home and I'll do it. So I went home. I have videos, time lapses of me doing the same yoga video every day and fainting at the same point in the video.
Shit.
And I would just get up, and the next day I would do it again, and I would try to get through that same pose. And I was resilient with it. My past self was stronger than I am now, that's for sure.
Wow.
But when I started doing that and I went back to him, he was like, you are so much stronger. You look so much better. You have the fight in you.
Yeah.
I don't want to waste time on people without the fight. So I started gaining more independence because I was gaining strength. You know, no matter if it's with an eating disorder or a condition that causes restriction like this, your body's going to start pulling vitamins from other parts of your body. It's going to make you weak. It's going to make you frail. It's going to take from you. And I was very malnourished. So it was a hard process to kind of build back up.
Yeah.
And as I did that, my partner at the time, who lived with me, sweetest person in the world, cared for me every day with my mom, was literally my co-caretaker, sat through every appointment, caught me every time I fainted, just an earth angel. I woke up one day and I was like, I am not the person you fell in love with because you fell in love with sick Jenna. And I'm like coming into myself, and I'm not her, and your purpose cannot be caring for me. And then I have this amazing friendship with this person where we're in and out of infusions every day. We're in and out of the hospital all the time. I'm sitting with her at her infusions. She's driving me to my appointment. We're trying to be normal college kids. We tried to go to parties and like drink water. And there'd be nights where she's driving me to the ER with an EpiPen in my leg. And those things weren't happening anymore. And that's what we built that friendship on. And as I started gaining that independence back, I ended up having to tell my boyfriend, we have to be done. You have to move out because I have to try to be a person now. What if I only have a few months like this? What if I only get to be like this for a little while?
Fuck.
And nobody asks to go through that when you're 20, 21, you know, and like, what are you supposed to do? So it was hard. I love him so much. He is one of the most special people ever. And my best friend, she still gives my parents my formula. We don't talk at all.
Wow.
And I miss her so much. And I always say to my mom, like, and I don't care if this airs too, and I hope she's watching it. Emma, if you're watching this, I love you. I always tell my mom, like, God, if whoever dies first, the other one's going to kill the other one for like letting this happen. But yeah, and it's like, I can't judge that. I can't judge her for that. I can't judge myself for that because what a crazy thing to go through. And I have to know that when I was at the peak of it and I didn't see any way out, I didn't see any life beyond applying for disability and laying in my bed and being horrified by everything. I couldn't stand able-bodied people. I didn't want to see them living my dreams. I didn't want to see my friends go off and do amazing things. I couldn't watch it. So I can't blame the people in my life that were really ill with me that can't be here with me now. Because I was like that too. I mean, I watched my friends compete in the Miss America organization when I was too sick to, and I was like, how could they go do the thing I wanted?
Yeah.
I was so bitter. I was so resentful. And I cannot blame anybody who is in a position dealing with an illness like that with no cure, no real helpful treatment options. It's hard. It's hard to watch people you love move on without you. And I always say, like, it's a roll of the dice every day. Like, I could come into contact with the wrong thing today, and it might be a short reaction, but the impact it has in my body could be long. And that's why it's also hard with trying new foods, because I could try a raspberry today, and if the reaction's severe enough that it affects my mental and my cognitive abilities, then suddenly I'm out for work. And then that reaction can tip the bucket into something else. And then it's a domino effect. And I never know, like, what's going to be the reaction that sends me back to where I started. And my doctors are like, we're just shook that you're doing this well.
Yeah.
Like, we do not know at all. Most of my doctors also don't want to talk to me for more than like 60 seconds if they know I'm not in crisis, just because they're like, all right, keep it moving.
Yeah.
You're good.
Almost like they don't want to jinx it in a way. Like, you just, almost like keeping, like the same with you shifting your identity, as it's like, I don't want to have any like dependence on that. Like we have to trust it. But gosh, I can imagine, now you have this piece of, you've worked your ass off getting at, prove me wrong with your doctor kind of idea. And you've done all these things and you've built this solid sense of self. But it sounds lonely because it sounds like you are both like having to rebuild connections with other people, but you can't fully build connections with people that don't have this same, like they're not going to understand in the same way. But you
Yeah.
have to trust and let people in and assume that not everyone's going to think you're making shit up or like judge you if something happens. And then you're also being really careful about how much you identify within that quote sick chick community, because you could see how that over identification could keep you there. And so, I mean, what do you do to cope with that? There is this loneliness, there is this unpredictability. And that to me feels like the burden even bigger than what if I eat a raspberry and it causes this, because that is like this, it's a soul wound. How do you face
Mm.
that?
Oh my goodness. That is a great question. I don't, I'm still learning how to face that every day. And I have the most amazing mom, and she never once doubted that there was something truly, genuinely, physically wrong with me. And I cannot thank her enough for that, because she was my voice when I couldn't advocate for myself. And she kept reminding me that there were going to be days after this, even when she didn't believe it. And um, she reminded me who I was before things got bad. Whenever I was like, I'm no one, like I lost
Mm,
myself, I'm a shell of myself. Whenever I was in that space, she would take me back to a memory or a moment or something where she knew I was Jenna. And she's just the best for doing that, because I'm like, even thinking about it now, I'm like, she tricked me into remembering who I am, which is wonderful. But God, it took such a toll on her as well. In terms of sense of identity and self during all of this, with the unknown and the unpredictable, it kind of became my biggest superpower, because there's this like fuck it mentality. Can I say that on here?
yeah, you can say whatever you want.
It's this fuck it mentality of like, well, what do I have to lose if I have everything to lose every second? Like, who
Mm,
gives a shit? And I had used social media as like a digital journal since Instagram came out. And so I had been posting my life and documenting my life for a couple thousand people for several years. And when my content was strictly sick chick stuff, that was widely the people who were watching me, and the people who didn't want to be a part of my life kind of weeded themselves right out because they didn't want to see it.
mm,
When I stopped posting about the illness all the time and I started just posting about things that I loved again, it almost set me up to be able to do that more in real life, I think, after COVID. Um,
mm,
and very quickly after that, um, I went back to college. I was on medical leave, so I went back to school. I was offered a job really randomly one day at my favorite coffee shop, and I said, I'm sick. I can't work here. And the guy was like, I see it on the internet. I think you should do one day a week. It'd be
mm,
really badass. And also, if you fail, who cares? So
mhm,
I started working there one day a week. Then I started working a bunch of days of the week. I had so much fun. I had all these positive human connections. No one knew that I was sick there. Like I would have such bad episodes and like hide in the bathroom or in the basement and no one would know. So I'm not saying it's healthy to hide
mm,
things, but I was able to sort of reinvent in this small way. And then I was like, I'm going to run for Miss Kenosha again. Who gives a shit?
mhm.
Like my life was just changed by someone sharing their story.
Yeah,
This can't all be for nothing.
yeah.
And that's when I started Soul Space, which was all based on this concept of our knowledge is our greatest power. Because without the knowledge Emma gave me, I would have had no power in this situation. And everyone's perspective can change somebody else's life and somebody
Mhm,
else's story. You're always going to walk away with more after hearing somebody else's story.
mhm,
And winning Miss Kenosha was like the weirdest thing ever, because some people laugh it off and they're like, what a funny thing to do. You do
yeah.
pageants, like blah, blah, blah. The way overnight it went from me screaming into the void and basically no one giving a shit to
Mm,
overnight articles in the newspaper of young girl with allergic disease starts support group for people in need. And suddenly I had a platform.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly people were like, what's wrong with her?
Mm-hmm.
And then people were seeing the term, and then they were reaching out to me. And then I met this wonderful girl, Lily. She was 13 at the time. She's like 16 now, which blows my mind. And she's like, I just moved here. My mom's friend read about you in the paper, and I have the same thing as you. So she started coming to Soul Space. She would faint at Soul Space, which I'm only laughing because it was a safe space for her to do that.
I mean, the only place that someone can do it and everyone can laugh about it and move on and be like, all right, well, that's your turn. My turn might be next.
Oh, and I swear, if someone's going to find a cure, it's going to be Lily. She is amazing. Her name is Lily, and she is literally brilliant. And I tell her all the time, I'm like, I talk about you every time I have a chance because she writes the most scholarly things, and she's in all these interning programs for like future doctors of America. And like, she's doing all this stuff from like the age of 13 to 16 while being so much sicker than I ever was with the same condition. And she inspires me so much. So I feel like I finally started to get a better balance of, here's this part of my story, but it's a part of it. And I want to write more. And there's different chapters to my story. This is a chapter. And I really wanted to be able to help other people, especially kids, understand that whatever the chapter is of your life that you're like, I don't know if I want to own this. I don't know if I want this to be mine. Let it be yours, even if it's ugly, because what's going to come next is only going to be that way because of what came before.
Yeah.
And even if that's a horrible thing, the next thing can be a beautiful thing. And I know I'm still coming from a place of privilege saying that there are some people that go through things that are way beyond this. But again, it's not the pain Olympics. So I tried to keep that mentality while sharing that message. And ultimately, I still struggle navigating the balance of, do I want people to know about this or not? I was literally at a networking event yesterday that I got invited to with my business partner, and set before me is this plate of food. And the woman touched my shoulder and she's like, we know all about your situation. You don't have to eat it. No questions asked. Don't have to explain anything. And I was like, am I getting to a place in my life where I don't have to apologize 97 times? Like they already knew. But normally I do. I'm like, I'm so sorry. People want to give you food as like a, I love you, or I'm thankful for you, or a welcoming hospitality. And it can be seen as rude to say no. So it's hard sometimes to talk about my illness in awkward spaces like that, or when I'm just trying to be anything other than my illness and it gets brought up. But I try to just keep it quick. And if people are curious, I answer questions, but not overdoing it.
Okay. So I know we're right at time, and I have two things. One thing I want to say to you, and then one question, which you might already know because I kind of alluded to it in the beginning, but you kind of set me up really well here. I want to gift you with, I'm sure you've heard this. I don't want to be like, I am so powerful and amazing, but more just sometimes we need to hear it. You didn't do anything you need to apologize for. You didn't do anything wrong. Even when you described your mom and the burden that your mom went through, you said it through this tone of like, I have put my mom through this. You didn't do this. And you couldn't have done anything different than you did until you got to this point. So I want to give you the invitation to let that shit go.
Thank you.
Because that is not, you don't have to explain to somebody why you're not going to eat their food. And if they think you're rude, who the fuck cares? Like at the end of the day, it's not worth it, because then we are reinforcing the idea that you owe people an explanation for why you're existing the way that you are. And you don't, because you didn't do anything wrong. So I just want to say that and let you hold it. And maybe today you can receive it. Maybe tomorrow you can't. You're like, but I still feel like I have to apologize. But I just want to be another person on that side saying you didn't fucking choose this.
Thank you.
So
no, I really appreciate that.
Hold that. Now, my last question before we wrap up. You're going to be listening to this, let's say in 6 months, a year, 3 years. What do you want that Jenna to hear when she's in one of those dark days, when she feels like she has to hide, when she doesn't know if she can get out of bed and do the yoga pose? What do we want her to know?
I just want her to know that even though it always feels like you're running out of time, you're not, and you've used your time wisely, and you don't have to feel regretful or remorseful for the ways you've relaxed or enjoyed or not rushed life, because it does sometimes feel like you're racing time and going against the clock. But just give yourself some time to just reflect on how far you've come. We don't do that enough as people, really, genuinely. Like, it's so hard to always be thinking about what's next. But look back at that girl that was bedridden for a year. Look back at me right now sitting here doing this podcast. Like, think about all of the different times you could have just said no more, given up, could have taken the free ride on my mom and dad's couch and lived a pretty chill, happy life, but you didn't do that. So I hope wherever future Jenna is, that she is proud of every single moment, because nobody asks for something like this, and there is no right way to handle it.
I love that. Jenna, I am so grateful that you shared in this space with us today. I am, for everybody listening, even if you're like, I don't have this diagnosis, I'm just witnessing her story, I'm having these reactions, that's amazing. But I do want you to take that piece that she just said, because you're all doing this. I guarantee in some way, shape, or form, regardless of what your identity or circumstances is, you are dumping on yourself for not doing enough, not being productive enough. You should be doing this. You are carrying these stories and these regrets that are going to rob you of fulfillment and joy. And you are all deserving of that. And so I think all of us can learn a little something from Jenna in that space and that drive for self-compassion. Jenna, I'm going to have links for everybody to be able to check you out, but where is the best place for them to go?
You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Jenna Zeihen, JennaLeeJane. Basically, my name on everything is Jenna Zeihen, so you should be able to find me there.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
No,
this
you
has
are
been
an
wonderful.
Angel. I appreciate you holding the space for me so much.
Of course. All right, listeners, we will be back here next Sunday. For now, I just want you to take that moment, share in the grace and space for Jenna, for yourselves, for everyone around you, and recognize that we are all doing the best that we can. We are showing up every day, and that deserves to be celebrated. And I'll see you next week.